Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we've got two-game slate here, Seattle, Houston, and then the Yankees in Cleveland. Now, just like yesterday, we have a game that potentially got a rain situation. The Houston-Seattle game is in a dome, if most likely, so it won't be any issue there. So the way, I got some questions about this, the way the DraftKings works, and also on FanDuel even, if one of these games don't play, it just refunds the slate. So just act as if both games are going to play. That's the best solution when it comes to playing fantasy on this particular slate. Um, Before I get started, thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. Shout out to the Patreon members. I really do appreciate you guys. And let's get into it. So please smash that like and subscribe button too. That would really I really do appreciate it. So with that said, let's get into the pitchers themselves. So just like yesterday, it's kind of a Hail Mary on the pitching because they're all pretty even. And, you know, the teams, the best pitchers are kind of against the best teams here. So we have Valdez and Cortez, Beaver and Castillo. Two of these pitchers haven't even played against the team that they're matched up against, and that's Beaver against the Yankees and Castillo against Houston. And then Valdez and Cortez have both matched up against Seattle and Cleveland this season. And both have had some pretty good games against them. So Valdez, first of all here, he's had 2 games averaging 21 fantasy points a game. That was a 23-point game and 18-point game. Now he's been giving up a decent chunk of earned runs lately. He's actually had quite a few 20 earned runs in the last 10 games, which is quite a bit, as you can see. Now he does tend to have a couple really good games, and he does tend to get some strikeouts to offset that, but he hasn't been ideal, and Seattle's been hitting the ball pretty well lately, so I do worry about them a little bit in that particular matchup. And even against them in 2 games, he gave up 600 runs. Though he did get enough strikeouts where it gave him, you know, a 20-point game, so I think that's a similar potential in this matchup. Cortez, the other guy that actually had games against his opponent, against Cleveland, he had 2 games, averaged 25 fantasy points. In those 2 games, he had 25 and 24.5. Now, Cleveland's not a big strikeout team, but he did get 7 strikeouts a game against them, which is pretty solid. And I don't think Cleveland's really hitting the ball all that well lately. Now, here's the thing about Cortez, is he's wildly inconsistent. He booms and busts a lot. And so you can see he's got a lot of sub-15 scores, but he's got a lot of, 20s as well. He has been pitching well in the last few games, and he doesn't give up as many earned runs as some of the other guys on this particular slate. At least he hasn't lately, and so that's what I do like about him. He is averaging 20 fantasy points a game for the last 10, and he has given up 15 earned runs in those games as well. And so I do think he's probably one of the guys that I like the most. But none of these pitchers are in the best situations. So let's go ahead and talk about Beaver here. So Beaver is averaging 24 for the last 10. But again, like the earned runs, he's been pretty solid, but he has games where he just gets absolutely trashed. And so if we look at his record here, we're going to see some low-score games, randomly mixed in here, where he just gives up like 6 earned runs or 8 earned runs. Now, the thing is, he has only had 1 game in the last 14 starts, and that was against Detroit, where he didn't give up an earned run. And so that's a little bit concerning. And he's not as big of a strikeout guy as some of the other options on the slate. He's only had a couple, bigger strikeout games. He usually gets, 6 or 7, I guess, a game here. And so he's just not quite as ideal. I still think he's a good option, but against the Yankees is tough because the Yankees got a lot of guys that can hit home runs, and this game being at Yankee Stadium definitely hurts him to some degree. Then we're going to look at Luis Castillo. He's averaging 19.9 fantasy points a game. He's been giving up a lot of earned runs though, and if we look at his week to week, man, he's all over the place. He has a lot of games over 25, and then he just has a whole bunch of games at under 10. He's very extreme boomer bust option here. Now he's against Houston. Now Houston has some weirdness where sometimes they just get in these funks where they don't do much. But I still think he's probably the weakest pitcher on this particular slate and the most risky. He's also had the worst earned run average in the last 10. When it comes to just like head-to-head matchups, Valdez and Cortez are the only two that really have any history here. So that's and they've been pretty decent. So that's a pretty good opportunity. But it's nobody's super. I don't love anybody, quite frankly. I think just like yesterday, it's going to be hard pressed to see any of these guys get much over 20 fantasy points. I think Valdez and Cortez are the safest, but what the problem with those guys are is they're also the most inconsistent of the four pitchers. The other two pitchers are much more consistent, but they have the tougher matchups on this particular slate. So, it depends on what it is that you like to, maximize on these types of slates. The pricing is actually pretty. There's only $1,000 separating the four pitchers all the way. So you really have to decide, what it is that you want to prioritize. If you want to prioritize head-to-head matchups, then Valdez and Cortez is your guys. If you want to prioritize consistency, then Bieber and Castillo is your guy. And then if you want to prioritize strikeouts, then Valdez and Castillo is probably your guy. So it's just kind of all over the place and how you want to potentially mark this game up. It's really hard to make a decision, I think. So I didn't mean Castillo, I meant Bieber. Bieber and Valdez if you strikeouts. So yeah, so sorry about that. So yeah, it's just really determines how it is that you want to go for this. I tend to like consistency, which leads me to Bieber and Castillo, but I kind of feel like I do kind of like Seattle. I like some of the Seattle players, so it's probably going to be Bieber and Castillo for me, simply because they have the consistency on their side. I just don't love the matchups, but we'll see. As we get closer to time and we see the lineups, when it comes to like the bats against them, Bieber has the best WOBA and isolated limits and stuff like that, so that's a nice advantage. Castillo is the worst against lefties, and same as Cortez. Everybody else is just pretty solid against any batter. So overall, I think that it's going to be a tough matchup. I actually don't think that pitchers are really going to screw you too much today. They really didn't make much difference yesterday either. I mean, if you used right, then you pretty much had yourself a good chance. The batters are really going to be where it's going to be the hardest part to put together something. So let's go ahead and get into catchers. Now, my goodness, our catchers all over the place here. Just based on the expectation of who's going to play, I've got two guys to take a look at. Kurt Casilli, he's averaging only 5 fantasy points a game in the last 10. There's just not anybody that really jumps off the screen here. The only guy that I typically do like is Cal Raleigh for Seattle. Now, he's a good option, but he's not ideal in this matchup against Valdez. His batting average isn't great, but he's been good lately. So he's probably the guy that I like the most. But Casilli and Trevino for the Yankees are the two guys, if they do play, that I think that if you just want to go super value, then those are going to be the two guys that I like the most from the value aspect. And I kind of feel like today is a good way, going for one of the cheap options at catcher is probably a good way to pay up for some other guys, because we're going to have to figure out a way to do that. Obviously, if Kyle Raleigh doesn't play and it's Casilli, which, as far as I can tell, it looks like that's what they kind of think is going to happen. Or at least both of them are going to play or something like that. I do like Raleigh the best, but overall, if he does or doesn't play, then Trevino and Casilli are the best options for a catcher. There's really no good option there. It's all just very, I don't know, unappetizing here. So, like I said, Raleigh is the safest play, but if you need to save money, so let's just put the top two pitchers in here so we can see what the money looks like. No matter what catcher you use, you're going to be saving money. So that's kind of how that sits on this particular slate. At first base here, we have Josh Naylor for Cleveland against Cortez. Now, he's averaging about 6 fantasy points a game. His batting average has been down, but he's been good against the Yankees this season, averaging 348. And even though he didn't do good in the last game, I think he's been playing pretty solid lately. He's at least getting hits in most games, and so that's potential for points. Ty France is the other guy for Seattle. He's averaging 7 fantasy points a game. He's been really good against Houston this season as well, and he actually did really good in the first game. I feel like this is a little bit interesting matchup for him, and so I do like him quite a bit on this particular slate. At second base, we have Andres Jimenez for Cleveland. He's averaging about 4 fantasy points a game last 10, but he has had some hits in the last 3 of the last 5 games, and he is scoring some points, and it's really hard to find much at this position that I love, and so him and Gleyber Torres are the top 2 guys. Now, Torres is absolutely just smashing the ball lately, averaging 11.6 fantasy points a game, and so I think he's probably my top play at second base. But Jimenez is a nice option if you want to come off of him for a secondary pick. And then obviously Jose Altuve, he's been great. Obviously his price point makes him kind of hard to roster, no matter what the slate is, because of being pretty high. Unlike the games yesterday where the prices kind of came down some, the prices here are pretty up there. So at third base, we have Alex Bregman, 7.7 fantasy points a game last 10. He's been solid against Seattle as well, and he did great in the first game of the series. Then we have Jose Ramirez, who, again, just like Altuve, extremely expensive, averaging 10 fantasy points a game last 10. He does need a home run. Obviously, we would like him to hit a home run in this game, but if we use him. But obviously, his price is pretty up there. Another guy I'm going to mention is Donaldson, who hasn't been playing well. I don't really recommend using him, but if you do like to use guys that have good matchup potential, like if they've been good against the pitcher in the past, he's 3 for 10 in his career against Bieber, and 2 of those hits are home runs. So that's just I don't love that, but I do like it. So if it's something, if you want to go with the Hail Mary approach with him, you could definitely do that. Jeremy Pena is my top guy at shortstop. He's averaging almost 10 fantasy points a game. I don't really see too much to hate about him. He does tendency to have, off games, but he's been playing pretty solid lately, and he's a home run threat, and he's out of the slump that he was in for the last couple weeks of the season, and so I do like him in this spot. And then obviously the other guy is Ahmad Rosario, who's averaging about 6 fantasy points a game. He's been solid against the Yankees as well on the season, and he's been pretty good lately, getting fantasy points even if he's not getting hits. He does have stolen base potential as well. Overall, I don't really like anybody else at that position. If Oswald Perez was actually playing, then that would be a nice option at this position. Unfortunately, he didn't get picked up for the roster. So for the final outfield situation, I'm going to give you my 4 value plays first, and then give you the 3 up expensive guys. So first of all, we're going to look at Trey Mancini. Now, Trey Mancini is the epitome of the extreme boomer bust. He is batting a whopping .097 for the last 10 games, averaging 2 fantasy points a game. He is a home run threat. This is a plus matchup, and from that perspective, he's actually been good in 6 games against Seattle, averaging 8 fantasy points a game. He has not gotten a single fantasy point in 4 games, but he's also $3,000. So if you want to utilize him as a Hail Mary option in order to pay up for some other guys, then he's somebody you could definitely do that with. He's just pretty risky, but he does project well against Castillo, so that is something to consider. But still, he's extreme boomer bust. Oswaldo Cabrera is probably my favorite guy in the outfield when it comes to just cheap bats. He's averaging almost over 6 fantasy points a game. His price is pretty inexpensive. He's been getting on base a lot. He didn't do anything in the first game against Cleveland, but he's been pretty good lately, and he's not causing too much problem. He's not having a lot of 0 games, and so I do like him as one of my top options on the slate. And you can also put him in the second base if you choose, but I do think that he's better fit in the outfield because you can put Torres or Jimenez at second. Then as 2 more guys, Oscar Gonzalez for Cleveland. He's been really solid lately, averaging 7 fantasy points a game. He's been hitting the ball pretty well lately, and I think he has, 10 plus fantasy point potential in this one. He's another guy that I'm pretty confident that I'm going to use because I like what he's been doing lately, and he's another guy that he gives you some money to pay up at other positions. And then Mitch Haniger for Seattle. Now, I don't like him quite as much, but he has been hitting .290 for the last 10 games, averaging 10 fantasy points a game. He's just not been good in Houston, but he has only faced them twice, and so that is part of the reason why he hasn't got a ton of fantasy points there. But overall, he is a good option. He's been hitting the ball pretty well lately, and so I do like him in this matchup, but it's not as ideal as some of the other options. And so for the expensive guys at outfielder, we're going to look at Yordan Alvarez, who's averaging 417 for the last 10 games, 9.8 fantasy points a game. He's absolutely crushed Seattle on the season, 12 fantasy points a game this season, so I really do like him here. And then Aaron Judge. Now, he's been kind of all over the place. He's averaging 9 fantasy points a game. His batting average has dropped off a lot. But he did okay against Cleveland the first game, having 9 fantasy points. He also stole a base. And he's been pretty good. Like, he's not going to zero on you very often. He had a little bit of a slump, but he did hit a home run at the end of the season against Texas. And so I look for him to have a pretty solid game in this particular situation against Cleveland, a team who we averaged 20 fantasy points a game and had 2 home runs in 7 games. Obviously, we do need him to hit a home run if he's going to pay off for us, but he's somebody you could take a look at. Kyle Tucker, he's only averaging less than 200 the last 10 games, but he is 5.5, and he's been not great against Seattle this season, but I do think his price has come down a little bit where it makes him a little bit more equitable. One other guy I'm going to mention is Stanton, who's averaging 8 fantasy points a game. He's an extreme boomer bust option for an expensive guy. He sometimes gets a lot of zeros, and then sometimes he hits home runs, so that's kind of how you have to deal with him. So he's a risky guy, but you could potentially look him if you don't like Kyle Tucker as much. With that said, thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing again. This slate's going to be all over the place. I don't know how you're going to, you're going to have to decide how you want to go to the pitching. I think there's a decent enough value in the outfield and at catcher and first base that you're going to be able to pay up at the other positions. But overall, I think you got to pay down at outfielder, catcher, and first base on this particular slate. Of course, you could also throw Jeremy Pena at shortstop. So, with that said, thank you guys again for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.